Since announcing earlier this month that my reporting team is working on a series called Vicious Cycle about bicycle safety and infrastructure around Greater Boston, I've gotten a number of comments from close friends and readers alike along the lines of this. Why the hell do you care about bikes so much? You don't even ride one. You're either on the train, on foot, or driving. And I'm sick of those cyclists too. They're always blowing through lights and pedaling aggressively. If you've ever spoken up for the rights and lives of cyclists in the company of devoted drivers, then you've probably heard a spiel just like that one. And as somebody who many motorists perceive should be on their side because I occasionally push my Corolla downtown and in Cambridge and Somerville, the reaction to my advocacy is often like when ignoramus bigots question why white people would back the Black Lives Matter movement. Needless to say, the haters have it wrong. The reporting done by my team at the Boston Institute for Nonprofit Journalism over the past couple of months is filled with more than enough statistics and citations of relevant studies to quell those who are looking for concrete reasons that we need to improve streets and sidewalks. From a simple human perspective, however, it just seems that those of us who don't commute on pedals, whether it's because we can't due to physical or logistical limitations or because we're just too lazy or scared, should at least acknowledge that our brothers and sisters who do ride bikes are onto something quite sustainable in an age of otherwise despicable excess. And we should want to help them keep on pedaling in any way we can, even if it means losing a couple of parking spots. A lot of what we cover in my newsroom and on Beyond Boston is related to power, from who wields it to how their muscle manifests through media. 10 times out of 10, the individual or enterprise with the most power, be it might, money, influence, or all of the above, tends to win. All purported rules be damned. Thinking of it along those lines, what on earth is more obnoxious and unfairly powerful than a car or a truck in an intersection that pedestrians and bike riders must brave as well? Do a lot of cyclists run lights? Sure, and a lot have been ticketed for it too. But none of that changes anything. Not any more than a token crime by an undocumented immigrant validates the garbage spewing out of President Trump's mouth. And on that note, whether you're on foot or behind some handlebars or a steering wheel, I propose that we all just think about what the Donald would do and then do the exact opposite. And don't even get me started on these wealthy jackasses clogging up commercial airspace with their personal jets. But enough about me and how I feel about cycling. I've barely even been on a bike since I knocked 7 teeth out of my mouth launching my Mongoose BMX off a ramp back in middle school. For our first segment, we turn to the youngest reporters in the Beyond Boston family, the crew from Youth Media Camp at Somerville Community Access Television, who recently interviewed several activists and cyclists about the reality of traversing our region on two wheels. After that, we have a piece from Brookline Interactive Group about the miracle of bike sharing, and then we'll be right back here with our in-studio interview with an advocate who's working to make the streets safer for all of us.
Hello and welcome to the Somerville Neighborhood News. I'm Fiona and this is Isa. We're here with Ken Carlson, the head of the Somerville Bike Committee. We're going to be asking him a few questions about bike lanes and bike safety. What is your opinion on bike lanes and bike safety?
That's a pretty big question. I'll try to answer it fairly shortly. So as part of the Somerville Bicycle Committee, our job is to try to keep bicyclists safe in Somerville. And we are trying to get more and more safe places for people to bike. So we think that bike lanes are a pretty good place for people to bike. The safest place would be what you guys said earlier when we were talking, would be the community path as a really super safe place to bike. And we're all about trying to make the city as safe as possible for everybody who wants to bike. So we do a lot of bicycle education. We do a lot of planning on how to make safer streets, and a lot of outreach to people to try to keep them safe while they're biking.
I think that there are a lot of different competing interests on the roads, pedestrians, cars, and even dogs and bikes. And I think it's hard for everybody's rights to be always respected. So sometimes they are and sometimes they aren't. I think that bike lanes are better than nothing, but I actually think that in some places, especially on Massachusetts Avenue, bike lanes are not safe for cyclists.
So Beacon Street is the busiest bike route in the entire Boston metro region, not just Somerville, but any place in Boston. And we looked at Beacon Street a few years ago and said, we need to have protected bike lanes. And protected bike lanes are bike lanes that are almost like having a bike lane on the sidewalk. It's separated from moving cars by a curb, but it's separate from the sidewalk too. So there's a place for pedestrians, there's a very safe place for bicyclists, and then there's a place for cars. So we put forward the idea for the protected bike lanes on Beacon Street, and they are being built this year. We're really excited.
Anybody who knows me knows that I bike a lot. I have a lot of different kinds of bicycles, and I try to ride my bike every single day. And I think that in a place like Somerville, where we have so much traffic and so much density, it's a great way to get around and get exercise.
There's probably not a day during the year when I don't bike, unless it's a big snowstorm.
Riding your bike is help you a lot, like I always said. You know, it make your blood circulation moving better. It make you fit a little bit better.
Bicycling can be safe. It is. It's a lot of fun, and it's a great way to get around the city. But I think everybody has to obey the laws. Everybody has to be as careful as they can, motorists and bicyclists. And I think we all have to just get along really well together, and I think everybody will be safe.
Usually we tell them about, because there's a law, you have to wear a helmet. When you have a bike, you need a helmet. You need a light for the car to be able to see you, and at night. And most of them, when you tell people that, it's for your own, it's for the own safety.
My roommate Amanda Phillips was a cyclist in Cambridge. She got hit by a car and died last June. She was riding her bike. She was wearing a helmet, and it was an accident where nobody was really to blame except for the bike lanes not protecting her.
One friend of mine was killed last year in a bike crash in Porter Square, and he actually worked here at this company. So that was a very sad moment for a lot of us, both here at this company, and he lived in Lexington, but he biked through Cambridge and Somerville every day, and he was run over by a truck at Porter Square. So in response to that, we started a fund in his name so we've raised about $10,000, and we're trying to use that money to promote safety for truck drivers around bicyclists.
The cycling community in Cambridge and Somerville really came together, and it was just amazing to see people sort of get outraged and take action about cyclist safety in the city.
Our friend died in Porter Square, and Amanda Phillips died in Inman Square, all in about a 4-month period, which was very kind of sad. But the sadness led to action, and I think the action is going to lead to safer streets. Try to educate everybody. We try to educate bicyclists. We try to educate pedestrians. We try to educate motorists, people who drive. The slower cars go, the safer it is for pedestrians and the safer it is for bicyclists. So one is, please obey the speed limit. There are people, kids, people on bikes, people walking that we want to keep safe.
In Europe, there's a thing called a Dutch reach where, let's say I'm in the passenger side of the car, you want to open your door. Like, it's more, it maybe feels easier to open it with this arm, right, if you're sitting on the right-hand side. But the Dutch reach is they always train people to open with the opposite arm, and that way you can see behind you, and that reaching, you sort of look over. Amanda was the kind of person that is not a dangerous person and not a risk taker, and she was always the kind of person where if there was an emergency, you would hope she was there. And if it could happen to Amanda, it could happen to anybody. Like, sometimes we think that cyclists are like, oh, well, they were going too fast, they weren't looking, like you should really be on the defensive if you're riding around in the city because it's a dangerous place. But really, it's dangerous for everybody, even if you're not being reckless on your bike. Bad things can happen like this at any time, and it's not any one individual's job to make sure they don't happen. It's the job of the city because they're supposed to take care of the people that live there.
We are Fiona Hanley, Isa Membrano Gomez, Maya Hanley, and Eleanor Bogosian. We were a part of the News Youth Journalism April Vacation Camp. We went out to interview 4 people about bike lanes and bike safety.
Thank you for your attention. Drive and ride safe on the busy roads. Try to be careful when opening your car door.
Today, I'm taking you on my commute from here in Brookline all the way to Harvard Square in Cambridge.
So Hubway launched here in Boston in July 2011. It was part of an overall strategy to bring Boston from one of the worst cities in the country for bicycling to one of the best cities in the country for bicycling.
We, together with the city of Somerville and the town of Brookline, joined the system in 2012.
I used to ride in to Northeastern, and I used to go sailing after work, and wouldn't get home until 11 or 12 o'clock, and I was too tired to ride at that point, so then I would take the subway home. So Hubway's useful for one-way trips.
It's also very inexpensive. It's probably the least expensive form of transportation you can think of, especially if it's year-round. It's only $8 a month.
On my left, the notorious Mass Bike. Welcome to Urban Poetry.
So in Allston, we have a really great partner with Harvard University. A number of our stations in Allston are actually on Harvard property, and they've helped to sponsor Hubway coming to Allston.
Because I would never have gotten on a bike and started riding if it hadn't been for Hubway and for you.
And so I was using Hubway that summer and fall 2011, and then they put them away, and I was devastated. I needed that bicycle exercise.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank you for encouraging me to get a Hubway, and that if you had the courage to ride from here to Harvard every day, and you could do it under 30 minutes, I thought, well, maybe Daniel can do it, I can do it.
Thanks to Greater Boston being full of countless progressive voices, many of whom choose bikes over motor vehicles, our list of potential guests for the show is long. Over the past couple of months, our reporters from the Boston Institute for Nonprofit Journalism have interviewed dozens of advocates, municipal planners, and residents who were involved with the movement for bicycle safety and improved infrastructure. So believe me when I say that Tom Lamar, Vice Chair of the Somerville Bicycle Advisory Committee, comes on the recommendation of a lot of people whose lives depend on the safety of the roads around here. Thanks for coming out.
Thanks for having me, Chris.
Cool. So did you bike here?
I did.
You have to say that. I'm just kidding. And do you have a common route? Because we've done a lot of talking with people, asking them, where do you go from where to where? What's your daily routine?
So I live right at the top of Winter Hill, and my office is near Leechmere. So there are a couple of different routes, mostly going near Union Square, and honestly, all of them are not quite safe enough. And every couple of months, I mix it up and try something new that I think is safer. But oftentimes, I'll come through Union, go down Webster, and then Cambridge Street the rest of the way to Leechmere.
And what's your nightmare intersection? What's the one that it's like you have to just be on full attention the whole deal.
I'd say Prospect Street, right at Somerville Ave. It's 3 lanes one way for cars, no bike infrastructure at all. Most of the people biking are turning left to get to Union. A lot of the people driving are turning right to get to the highway. So you have a lot of conflict between people trying to find a safe space anywhere and just not knowing what to do when there's no infrastructure to guide them.
So you do some advocacy, you do a lot of advocacy, and I assume you have a community, people that you talk to about. What do you all talk about amongst yourselves? And the whole point of this whole series is we're trying to get the word out to drivers and train takers like yours truly. So what's the inside scoop? What needs to be done?
So for example, our encouragement team is hosting the Rush Hour Challenge on Monday, which is a kind of multimodal challenge where people in the morning will go from Dudley Square to Faneuil Hall by their mode of choice, be that taking the T, walking, driving, biking, hubway, and so on. And then in the evening, go from Faneuil Hall to Davis Square. And it'll kind of spark a conversation around what's difficult and what works well, what kind of delays do you have looking for parking, what intersections are scary to bike through, and so on.
That's great. And also, this is, that's Boston, Cambridge, and Somerville. So that's kind of like, perfect segue to my next. It's important to connect all this infrastructure. So how does a conversation like that start? I mean, you work out of Somerville, so, where's the roundtable take place?
So we work closely with a lot of other groups, such as Cambridge Bike Safety, Boston Cyclists Union, Walk Boston, Livable Streets Alliance, and so on. And usually just coming together, whether it's on a phone call or just meeting up, we can find some common ground there.
Cool. And okay, so one of these streets that connects at least, actually there's Beacon Street in Boston, but also that connects Cambridge and Somerville in particular, heading into Porter Square, which is another story altogether.
Beacon Street in Brookline as well.
Beacon Street in Brookline. So Beacon Street is this, I have a lot of friends who ride bikes. Beacon Street is this. It's got a lot of different reputations, most of them not so positive. Well, first, in general, the part in Somerville, I've written about this particular stretch of Beacon Street twice. 4 years ago and 2 years ago, and it's like a cyclist nightmare. Can you tell people about what's going on there right now? It seems a little promising.
Yeah, so you're right that the Beacon-Hampshire corridor is the single busiest bike corridor anywhere in Massachusetts. Right. And that's why Somerville is building a protected bike lane along much of the distance of Beacon Street. And that's where the bike lane is raised a few inches off the street and separated from moving vehicles by a curb there. So much of Beacon Street will be much safer once we have that implemented. And unfortunately, the project took far longer to get off the ground than we would have hoped. And Beacon Street became kind of a notorious moonscape, I heard people calling it, or people joking that they needed their mountain bike just to get down Beacon Street.
It's truly horrible. So, talking about that, what is that going to be? And there's also, of course, there's a protected bike lane on Western Ave in Cambridge. When people see, or I don't know if is that the technical?
Yeah.
What is when people see that, even motorists who maybe were upset about losing a couple of parking spaces, does that show? Do people start to see, okay, this is best thing for everybody? Does it take to actually have that infrastructure in place for that change to happen?
I think so, and that's what a lot of other cities, for example, New York City has been building a ton of protected bike lanes and often studying them very rigorously afterwards, looking at whether people are safer, whether they feel safer, and looking at how businesses on the street doing, for example, by looking at the sales tax receipts from businesses along there. And what they consistently find is that the main thing is to make it much safer for biking. And usually you get a significant increase in the number of people biking. It approximately doubles. But what they didn't necessarily expect was that it's actually safer for everybody as well, right. Partly just by making it more predictable. And I think part of it is that with a traditional bike lane that's just paint, it's kind of easy to misuse. So for example, if you're parked next to it, it's pretty easy to accidentally or to open your door into the bike lane. And we encourage people to do the Dutch reach and avoid that. But we know it's far too easy for somebody to just not think about that. And a protected bike lane makes that completely impossible, or practically impossible for anybody to get doored. And even if somebody did get doored, they would thankfully not be next to moving vehicles, so it would be a much more minor injury than otherwise. We also sometimes see people, or especially Ubers lately, double parking in bike lanes, which honestly, when it's a painted bike lane, you can kind of understand how it feels natural, and people might not understand as much that they're not supposed to. But with a protected bike lane, again, it becomes basically impossible or much harder to misuse it.
Cool. So, I'll finish off by we see, obviously, just like with almost anything else, with any other issue, a lot of people bike, whether they ride to work or for fun. But you see extra advocacy after there's a tragedy. We see this in a lot of, whether it's related to shootings or different issues. What do you do as a full-time advocate to keep people in the mix? And go ahead and give your pitch. And where can people find out about the programs that you just spoke about?
Sure. So one way to find out more about us is following the Somerville Bike Committee on Facebook or going to our website, somervillebikes.org. And as you mentioned, there is often more of a focus after a crash or a fatality. And the Vision Zero efforts, part of the vision of eliminating traffic fatalities and serious injuries, that is currently very reactive. Right. And they often, at least sometimes, they make relatively promising changes afterwards. But I think we need to be looking in the movement of looking at how we can build a safe bike network around the city, and looking at maybe how do you safely bike from Davis to Union, or from Central to downtown Boston, and connecting protected bike lanes, giving people options to get around safely before another fatal crash happens.
Well, that's great. I mean, I guess we're going to see a lot of that pretty soon, a lot of experimentation, and I'm looking forward to it, even as a driver. Perhaps if it's safe enough, I'll get my helmet on one day. Thanks a lot for coming out.
Thanks, Chris.
All right. And now for a clip from our partners at Cambridge Community Television that shows some of the serious mobilization and passion around bike issues that we've spoken about, followed by closing comments from BINJ Network Director Jason Pramas. And don't forget to follow us at facebook.com/BINJ Network and at BINJ Reports on Twitter to keep up with all of our coverage on this issue.
So my name is Quentin Zondervan. I'm the president of Green Cambridge, and we are happy to support this effort to get more bike safety in Cambridge. We're very concerned about the fact that people are dying on our streets, and we need our city officials to do more, both in the immediate term to protect pedestrians and bicyclists on the roads, and in the longer term to make sure that the streets are safe for everybody, including car drivers. And right now we are feeling a little bit frustrated because we don't see enough action being taken to ensure our safety.
6 days ago, this was just a dare on social media. I'm not an activist. I'm not affiliated with an activist group or anything like that. And we just all sort of came together and galvanized on this. And right now we're going into city council to demand change. And I'd say we probably had about 150, maybe 200 people here. Great energy, great chant. I think the council heard us, and we'll see what happens from here. I mean, we'll see if real change happens. I mean, this is not the first time, but I'm optimistic. Cambridge Bike Safety Group has a petition, and about the same time that we put together this rally and a little bit before that, they assembled well over 1,000 signatures. I think they're up about 1,500 right now, so hopefully that'll put some pressure on it. And they're also behind a lot of the recommended orders that are sitting there right now. And the fact that this tagged off of the Ghost Bike ceremony that was last week and dovetailed with this council meeting is sad but fortuitous, and hopefully, Joe Lavins's life did not end without a positive outcome, and I know that he would be really proud if he saw that this was happening in his name. So tonight's coalition of groups was Mass Bike, the Boston Bicycle Union or Boston Cyclist Union, the Cambridge Bicycle Safety Group, and Livable Streets, and all those people are working together on the Vision Zero plan and working with the cities. So go to any of their websites and follow up with them.
There are many merits to backing legislation, regulations, and customs that make it easier for people to use bicycles to get around. Improving individual health by getting more people more exercise, improving public health and global warming prospects by reducing carbon emissions, and relieving traffic congestion, to name just a few. And over the last 4 decades, many communities have created bike lanes and bike paths, installed bike racks, and limited certain streets to pedestrians and bikes for those very reasons. The problem is that the societal benefits that come with an expanding bike culture are unevenly distributed. In the car-centered suburbs, meaning most of the US, using a bike as a primary transportation mode is more difficult and significantly more dangerous than it is in many cities. And the distances people have to pedal to get to jobs or shop are longer, stopping more people from getting out of their cars and onto bikes day to day. Ameliorating that situation will require better regional planning with an eye toward creating bigger, better public transportation networks that link to bicycle infrastructure in their last mile. then building bike lanes from the network hubs where buses, trains, and trolleys converge out to the neighborhoods where people live. It will also require a change in thinking by millions of people that are used to jumping into their cars anytime they need to go anywhere, be it 100 miles or, all too often, only a few blocks away. Such a change means that people will need a pretty big incentive to begin to do things differently. So here's one important incentive. Life is easier when you don't have to rely on a car to get around. In cities like Boston, more and more people are riding their bikes to subway stops or bus stops in the morning, parking them there, taking the T to work, and reversing those steps in the evening. Many others ride their bikes all the way to work, moving much faster on average than cars stuck in traffic around them. Still more use our growing rental bike system, Hubway. From my perspective, living and working in the city spares me the expense of a car. And more importantly, I don't need to own one to get around. I live a couple of blocks from 4 bus lines and a 10-minute walk from 2 T-stops. With a bike, that 10 minutes plus any wait time becomes 2 or 3 minutes. And skipping the T and biking across town takes 20 to 30 minutes, even in busy traffic. When it's time to shop, one can either use a bike equipped with a basket or trailer, or take a bus or train both ways, or walk or bike to the nearest market and take a cab back if buying heavy stuff, or take a cab both ways, or use a car sharing service like Zipcar to rent cars and vans by the hour. Myself and fellow urbanites have all these options and more because Boston, Cambridge, Somerville, and Brookline all have dense public transportation networks, augmented by quasi-public and private transit options, and a fast-growing separate bicycle infrastructure. Businesses and public services cluster around transportation hubs, so there's much more for me to do much closer to home than when I lived in the suburbs. In general, this means that I have more leisure time in the city than many people in the suburbs do because I'm commuting less, and I have more money in my pocket because I don't have to own a car to get around. I'm also not sitting in traffic for big chunks of my day, so my life is that much less stressful, understanding that every form of transportation has its own problems. Best of all, I can take comfort in the fact that my carbon footprint is very small. The amount of carbon that's burned in the form of oil and natural gas to allow me to be a modern person in an advanced industrial society is much lower than someone who has to own a car. True, housing prices are higher in the city than the burbs, but the difference is definitely offset by cheaper transportation costs. And having more free time is invaluable. My point here is simple. More folks need to get behind policies that make an urban multimodal transportation network possible for the vast majority of U.S. residents, instead of just a minority of Americans in mostly coastal cities like Boston. That's going to require large numbers of people to be more aware that life with bikes and public transit is easier and better in some important respects than life in the current suburban car culture. And that's why I'm recounting my daily transportation experience for you today, so that you all can think it over and consider joining advocacy coalitions like Mass Bike in backing policies that improve bicycle transportation options in your city or town, and then help fight for more money to vastly expand our public transportation system. 2 reforms which will, in tandem, transform suburban biking from a recreational activity, sport, or idiosyncratic form of commuting into a commonplace. For Beyond Boston, I'm Jason Pramas.